What I'm about to explain today is something most people never notice until years later. And by the time many families finally recognize it, they often look back and realize the signs had been quietly building for a very long time. Not dramatic memory loss, not suddenly forgetting loved ones, not the Hollywood version of dementia most people imagine. I'm talking about the subtle changes that can begin years before a formal diagnosis ever happens. Tiny shifts in sleep, personality, emotional reactions, walking patterns, decision-making, focus, smell, motivation, even the way someone tells stories. And honestly, this conversation matters far more than most adults realize because dementia rarely appears overnight. In many cases, the brain starts changing slowly, silently, and invisibly long before families connect the dots. My name is Dr. Scott Levin, and for more than 15 years, I've worked with adults experiencing age-related neurological changes, cognitive decline, vascular health complications, and early memory disorders. And one thing I've learned over time is this. The earliest warning signs of cognitive decline often do not look like memory problems at all. That surprises people. Because most adults assume dementia begins with forgetting names or getting lost. But in real clinical life, the earliest shifts are often emotional, behavioral, sensory, or psychological long before severe memory impairment develops. Before we go deeper, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely read these comments carefully. How old are you? And have you noticed any small mental or emotional changes in yourself or someone close to you recently? Maybe changes in focus, motivation, sleep, mood, or memory? Leave your age and your experience below, because many people watching this video may realize they are not alone. Now let's start with one of the most overlooked early changes of all: sleep. And I don't just mean insomnia. Researchers studying neurodegenerative disease have discovered something fascinating over the last decade. In many adults, subtle sleep disruption begins years before measurable dementia symptoms appear. Not because sleep problems directly cause dementia in every case, but because the brain's nightly cleanup systems begin functioning differently. During deep sleep, the brain clears metabolic waste products through what researchers call the glymphatic system. Think of it as a nighttime sanitation system for the brain. And when deep restorative sleep becomes fragmented repeatedly over many years, some researchers believe proteins associated with neurodegenerative disease may accumulate more aggressively. But here's the part families often miss. The sleep changes are usually subtle at first. A person may begin waking more frequently around 3 or 4 a.m. Dreams may become unusually vivid. Sleep schedules become inconsistent. Restlessness increases. Daytime fatigue slowly appears even after sleeping enough. And because these changes seem common with aging, many people dismiss them completely. I remember one patient in his early 60s who came to clinic because of chronic exhaustion and poor concentration. His wife kept saying something interesting. He's not forgetting things exactly. He just feels mentally different. That wording stayed with me. Mentally different. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, just different. Over the next few years, more noticeable cognitive symptoms eventually appeared. But looking back, the earliest clues were sleep disruption, emotional flatness, slower reaction timing, and reduced motivation long before serious memory decline became obvious. And that leads us to another silent change many people overlook: emotional shifts. This surprises families all the time because they expect dementia to look intellectual, but sometimes it first appears emotionally. A person who was once patient becomes unusually irritable. Someone socially engaged becomes withdrawn. Decision-making changes. Empathy decreases. Motivation fades. Interest in hobbies disappears. And often, family members explain it away as stress, retirement adjustment, aging, or personality changes. Now, to be very clear, not every emotional change means dementia. Depression, anxiety, loneliness, sleep deprivation, medications, chronic stress, hormonal shifts, and many medical conditions can affect mood and cognition. But neurologists have increasingly recognized that certain degenerative conditions can quietly affect emotional regulation circuits in the brain years before major memory loss appears. And this is where things become psychologically complicated, because humans adapt slowly to gradual change. If someone changes dramatically overnight, families notice immediately. But when tiny changes happen over 5 or 10 years, the brain normalizes them little by little. That's why hindsight becomes so powerful in many dementia cases. Families later say, "Now that I think about it, things started changing years ago." Now, here's another surprisingly early shift researchers have been studying very closely: changes in smell. This is one of the most fascinating areas in modern neurology right now. Certain neurodegenerative diseases appear to affect smell processing regions of the nervous system remarkably early. Some adults begin struggling to detect odors properly years before more classic cognitive symptoms emerge. Coffee smells weaker, food tastes flatter, perfume becomes harder to notice. Subtle household odors disappear. Again, many things can affect smell: sinus disease, allergies, infections, smoking history, medications, aging itself. But researchers from institutions including Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic have repeatedly explored the relationship between declining smell identification and later cognitive decline risk. Now, does losing your sense of smell automatically mean dementia? Absolutely not. But it's one example of how early neurological shifts sometimes appear in unexpected ways long before memory becomes the main concern. And honestly, that's what makes this topic emotionally difficult for many people, because the earliest changes are often subtle enough to create uncertainty, not enough to feel clearly dangerous, but enough to create a quiet feeling that something has changed. Now let's talk about walking, because this is another area many families miss entirely. Researchers have discovered that changes in walking speed, balance, and movement coordination may sometimes appear years before formal cognitive diagnoses. A person may walk slightly slower, reaction timing changes, turning becomes less fluid, balance confidence decreases, movements become more cautious or stiff. Why does this matter? Because the brain systems controlling cognition and movement are deeply interconnected. And some neurologists now believe mobility changes may act as an early window into broader brain aging processes. I remember speaking with a woman whose father eventually developed cognitive impairment, and the first thing she noticed years earlier had nothing to do with memory. She said, "He stopped walking like himself." That sentence stuck with me because families often notice these subtle human changes before they can medically explain them. Now, another hidden early shift involves attention and mental processing speed. This is different from ordinary forgetfulness. Everyone occasionally loses keys or forgets names. That's human. What becomes more concerning is when the brain struggles with managing complexity itself. Following conversations becomes harder. Multitasking feels overwhelming. Financial decisions become confusing. New technology creates unusual frustration. Concentration fades faster. And importantly, Many highly intelligent adults become extremely good at hiding these struggles early on. They compensate. They write more notes. They avoid difficult situations quietly. They withdraw socially to protect themselves from embarrassment. That's one reason early cognitive decline can remain hidden for surprisingly long periods. Now, here's something I really want viewers to hear clearly. Fear is not helpful here. Awareness is. Because one of the biggest mistakes modern internet culture makes is convincing people that every memory lapse means dementia is beginning. That is simply not true. Stress affects memory. Poor sleep affects memory. Depression affects concentration. Anxiety affects focus. Blood sugar instability affects cognition. Vitamin deficiencies can affect thinking. Medications can affect mental sharpness. Even chronic loneliness can significantly affect brain performance over time. So this conversation is not about panic. It's about recognizing patterns thoughtfully and realistically. And perhaps most importantly, understanding that brain health is influenced by far more than genetics alone. Now let's discuss something hopeful because this part often gets ignored online. Many lifestyle factors associated with brain aging are modifiable, not perfectly controllable, not magically reversible, but modifiable. Research increasingly shows strong relationships between long-term cognitive health and sleep quality, blood pressure control, exercise, social connection, blood sugar regulation, hearing protection, stress management, nutrition, and cardiovascular health. In other words, the brain does not exist separately from the rest of the body. The same things that damage blood vessels, sleep systems, inflammation pathways, and metabolic stability often affect brain aging too. That's why many neurologists now focus heavily on prevention years before severe symptoms appear. And honestly, one of the healthiest things adults can do is stop thinking about dementia only as a memory disease. It's a whole brain health conversation. Sleep matters, movement matters, isolation matters, stress matters, hearing matters, vascular health matters, and small long-term habits often matter more than dramatic overnight brain hacks promoted online. Now, here's the final thing I want you to remember. The goal of understanding early cognitive changes is not to live in fear of every forgotten word or misplaced item. The goal is awareness without panic. Pay attention to persistent patterns. Notice meaningful changes. Support brain health early. Encourage medical evaluation when concerns become consistent. And most importantly, don't ignore emotional or behavioral changes simply because they don't look like memory problems. Because in many cases, the silent changes begin long before most people realize what they're seeing, and once families understand that, something important happens. They stop waiting for dramatic collapse before taking brain health seriously. They start paying attention earlier, more compassionately, and often much more wisely.